Having problems deciding how to vote or perhaps even whether to vote in this provincial election? Do you vote the party, the leader, the riding candidate, specific issues? If you vote habitually for the same party, then the dilemma of making a political choice might be unfamiliar to you. If, however, you're undecided or unimpressed, this next discussion is for you. Let's welcome Valerie Schatzker. She's a musician and writer. Paul Burling, retired auto worker and blogger. Ian Williams, poet and professor of English at Sheridan College, and Rashi Kilnani, freelance journalist and communications consultant. And it's great to have all four of you around our table here at TVO tonight. Let's just start. I want to spend a little time with each one of you, just sort of setting the table for the discussion to come. Valerie, to you first. How engaged are you in this election campaign so far?
Very.
You're very engaged?
Yes.
Okay. What riding do you live in?
Toronto Centre.
Toronto Centre, so sort of downtown part of the city.
Yes.
Do you always vote?
Always.
You never miss a chance to vote?
I was taught when I was in public school that was a gift, and I had to exercise my franchise every time.
Do you know who you're going to vote for?
No.
So you're still undecided?
Not quite.
You've ruled some out, but you're still...
Yes.
I think, okay, we'll see what that means in a little bit. Okay, let's go over here. Rashi.
Yes.
How engaged are you in this campaign so far?
I'm watching carefully.
Okay, what does that mean?
Meaning I'm new to Toronto. I've only been here about 4 months. So this is very different from where I was last, which is India, and then of course Quebec, both places that have had very exciting elections recently. So I'm watching, I'm observing, I'm learning a little bit more about the electoral process here in Ontario, a little bit more about the issues here that are in many ways different than the issues that I faced as a Quebecoise when I lived in Quebec.
You've never lived in Ontario before?
I lived in Ontario as a high school student when I first
came
to Canada, and then I kind of had a year in between there and a year in between here, but in Canada, I've largely lived in Quebec. Quebec has been home.
Okay. What riding do you live in?
Toronto Centre.
Also Toronto Centre, okay. Do you always vote?
I don't, I'm embarrassed to say. I always follow politics. And I don't know, as a journalist, sometimes I feel that maybe I shouldn't vote. Maybe that'll make me seem less credible. Mm-hmm. So I kind of have mixed feelings about voting, but I love politics, so I love to watch. So
it's good that we've got you here for this. All right, let's go. Ian, how engaged are you in the campaign so far?
I'm sort of watching.
Sort of watching?
Sort of watching, but watching from like the gym wall, right, at the dance happening in the middle, right? So I'm not quite sure what's going to happen, and hoping to sort of stay lurking in the shadows there while watching. So not terribly engaged, but observing sort of what hits me, but not actively going out to find information.
Where do you live?
I live in Brampton. Brampton West would be my riding.
Brampton West is your riding? Do you always vote?
Not religiously, but historically, yeah. I make an effort to go out there to the public school and cast a ballot, yeah.
Okay, very good. Let's go to Paul. How engaged are you so far?
Being a political blogger, I'm very engaged.
You're very engaged.
I follow everything every day that's going on, tweets, Twitter, newspapers, news media, whatever I can find.
Why?
I just find it's incredibly interesting. I find the backroom dealings are more interesting than the stuff that's actually out in the media, some of the stuff you deal with.
Okay, what riding do you live in?
I'm in the riding of Ajax.
Well, there is no riding of Ajax.
Ajax Pickering.
Ajax Pickering,
Right.
Okay. And do you always vote?
I always vote.
You've never missed one?
Never missed one.
Good
I don't
for
think
you.
there's any excuse to miss one. With the advanced polls, special polls, everybody should be able to make it.
They make it easy enough to vote that everybody
I think they
should
do.
vote.
I think, and everybody should, regardless of which party you vote for, whether it's one I support or not, I still think everybody should vote.
Okay. Thank you for setting the table for that. Here is watch the monitors here in the studio, because I'm going to play a little tape here of what other people have to say about this campaign. Roll tape, please.
It's all politics, you know. I used to vote before, and then, you know, I just stopped voting because you don't know who to trust.
I was a little concerned that we're even having an election because I didn't think that the Liberal budget was that bad a budget.
The current big three, don't interest me at all. They just pick numbers out of the air, make stuff up, and we're all supposed to believe it. So come on, I mean, we all know better.
It seems like the NDP have shifted to be more centrist, and I'm not sure I endorse their decision to push forward an election in the first place.
I definitely think the advertising when they put others down to raise themselves up is a useless waste of money.
It's kind of dirty politics, and literally there are times where I turn off the radio or I put it on mute. I'm not really interested in starting my day with that, on that tone.
Well, we'll try to improve the tone around this table here a little bit. Okay, when I talk to people, they say they vote for any number of different reasons. You know, it's the party, it's the leader, it's the local candidate, it's a particular issue, it's how my grandparents voted. I want to get a sense about that for you. Paul, how do you determine who to vote for?
I basically look at the party's platforms and decide which one I think is in the best interest of myself and of the province or the country if you're voting federally.
That takes effort. You make that much effort to look at all the platforms?
I do, actually, yeah, I do. I find this election's interesting because it's almost as if the NDP and the Liberals have switched.
Meaning the Liberals have moved left
Liberals
and
have
the NDP's
moved left,
moved
the
right.
NDP's moved right, which I find kind of interesting.
Ian, how do you decide?
I don't know. For me, it seems to go between like two issues, between sort of trusting a candidate or a party and the need for change, and sort of the ratio, whether I trust more or I feel the need for change more. I don't go on the internet and read all of the platforms. I have been to like Tim Hudak's website. So whatever hits me from the media, whatever hits me from just general being in the world, and sort of talking to colleagues and things like that. So a lived experience rather than a kind of theoretical or abstract platform
Word
experience.
of mouth can have an impact on you.
Absolutely,
It
absolutely.
does. Okay, Rasha, how about you?
Well, definitely platform and then also trust in the political leader.
How do you get that sense of the leader in order to determine whether you trust him or her?
You know, that's a very difficult question, and I'm really not sure how to answer that, because if you look at Tim Hudak, for example, right, I find that he's been quite transparent in terms of what he hopes to accomplish, to the point, you know, saying things that have made him quite unpopular. But he comes across as a very transparent, very credible person. But then at the same time, you suddenly hear that the Million Jobs Plan isn't actually a million jobs after all. And debates about whether, when the Conservatives left power, whether they actually left a deficit or not. And then there's some debate about, you know, a major issue like that. I think that in itself is disheartening, I think, in terms of Ontario politics as a whole, because if we can't have a kind of overall agreement on a big issue as to whether or not there was a deficit when the Conservatives left power, then that kind of undermines my credibility in the system as a whole.
I'll solve it for you. There was a deficit when the Conservatives left power. However, that was only halfway through the fiscal year. So the fiscal year wasn't over. If the Conservatives had been reelected, they say they would have balanced the books by the end of the year. But since they left halfway through the year, they didn't have that chance. I just put it out there for what it's worth.
Thank you.
And I appreciate it.
But that's the answer. Okay, Valerie, how about you? How do you decide who to vote for?
I read a lot. I watch the agenda and other programs. I come from a family where politics was discussed and argued about a lot, and it continues in my family. I argue a lot or discuss it with my 3 sons and my husband. We don't always agree.
Do you always vote for the same party?
No.
You're up for grabs, in other words.
Not right of center.
So you're going to vote either Liberal, NDP,
Or Green.
or Green. Greens aren't always left of center, but on some things they are, yes.
Yeah, that's
okay.
true.
Okay. Ian, how about you?
Thinking back, I think I have pretty much only voted for one party.
You want to say which one?
The Liberals, traditionally, right?
Provincially.
Yeah.
You always vote Liberal.
Right. But again, I have a sort of shorter lifespan here, so I'm 34 years old. I haven't had that much experience voting. But yeah, I feel sometimes like that's the party that I can trust. If I don't know quite the situation, I feel like it's a safe card to play.
Okay. Paul?
I've gone between all the parties, all the 3 major parties. This time I'm voting PC, more or less just based on the financial situation the province finds itself in right now. I think
You've decided
Tim Hudak's,
already?
I've decided already.
You used to be an auto worker.
I used to be an auto worker.
Okay. The auto workers' unions, you know, are not supporting the PC party.
I do that.
Does
I do
that
know
trouble
yeah.
you?
I think it doesn't bother me that much because while the leadership doesn't support the PC party, I think a lot of the people, the rank and files, actually do support the PCs. Oshawa is a great example of that. It's federally conservative writing, and that's about as auto worker sect as you can get right there.
Provincially too, I think.
Provincially too, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Rashi, how about you?
Well, if this was the United States, I'd plead the 5th. But it isn't.
You can sort of do that here too
Okay,
if you want.
well, I will in this case.
Are you genuinely undecided?
I am decided. I just would prefer not to say who.
That's allowed. Okay. I want to do a quick around the table here on all of the leaders. Who impresses you so far? Ian.
Who does not impress me? I can say that more easily. I'm not terribly impressed by Hudak, and that's I have to sort of stop myself at sort of making personal judgments about people, right? So you look into their eyes and into their faces, and there's a kind of deadness there, and automatically, as a human, I want to resist that, and I don't find him transparent. I find him stilted and rehearsed and staged.
I think she said the plan was transparent, maybe not him.
Oh, okay, that's fair then. I don't think the plan is very transparent either. But I'm curious about Horvath. She's sort of the dark horse in all of this. And I think the other two leaders have history, and they come out of places in parties with that cast long shadows. And for her, it's more of a discovery, right? So I find that kind of refreshing. So I'm curious about her.
Paul, who's impressed you so far?
I think Tim Hudak's done a good job so far. I think he has been transparent. What Ian said there, he does look a little stiff in front of the cameras and stuff, but from everybody I've talked to that's met him, when you meet him in person, he's actually a laid-back, everyday kind of guy, and people relate to him that way.
You can't shake 9 million hands, though, in a
You can't
campaign.
shake 9 million, you're right about that.
So coming across well on camera matters, doesn't it?
It does matter. It absolutely does matter.
Does he do okay at that?
I think he's far better this election than he was in the 2011 election.
Everybody says that. Okay. Valerie, how about you? Who's impressed you so far?
First of all, I don't like to dwell on leadership only. I think you have to look at the entire party. This presidential drift that we're going into doesn't please me. So I try to look at the entire party. I'm impressed, say, with the new leader of the Liberals. I think she's a intelligent, compassionate, progressive thinking person. But I'm kind of worried about the party because, after all, we had the predecessor, and he and his colleagues who supported him left her with at least three albatrosses to hang around her neck. I'm, like my partner here, not that impressed with Mr. Hudak. I saw Mr. Schreiner on your program.
Mike Schreiner, the Green leader.
That's right, and I thought that he was a very interesting, thoughtful person, and I was impressed. I'm not impressed with Andrea Horwath because she triggered this election, and I think it was a big mistake.
You don't find the election was necessary?
No. I think she could have gone on for another year. She was supporting them and working with them. The idea of a coalition is really interesting. Most countries in the world, developed countries, are governed by coalitions. And we seem to find it a dirty word here. Remember what happened in Ottawa. I kind of like the idea of having other opinions in cabinet, and maybe if it was a coalition, a better coalition in the past, maybe we wouldn't have had Orange, e-health, and gas plant scandals. I don't know.
Okay. Rashi, how about you? Which leader has impressed you so far?
Well, I mean, I think there are things about everyone that have impressed as well as upset me. What has upset me most of all is that I'm finding that there is very little, if anything at all, about immigrant settlement issues in all three of the platforms, and that upsets me. I feel that, given, especially here in Toronto, where half the population is born outside of Canada, and in Canada, where out of every 5 kids under the age of 15 was born to an immigrant parent or is an immigrant themselves, that this hasn't come up in the provincial elections, it bothers me. It's an issue that's important to me, and I'm disappointed.
I suspect that's because most of the leaders for most of the campaign have said, this is an election about jobs and the economy, and that's it. Mm-hmm. Do you find that fair?
Well, no, because I think immigrants are an integral part of the economy. And there's so much talk. I mean, everybody hears stories about, the PhDs driving taxi cabs. I mean, just yesterday, last night, I decided to stop by my local Subway and grab a sandwich. And I met a young man there from India who studied at George Brown and Niagara College, and he's working at Subway. And he, has a training in finance as well as marketing. And I mean, I don't think these are issues that die down, and I think it's really quite a disgrace not to touch on these issues, because what's the point of bringing people over if you're not settling them in properly?
Ian, what's this election about?
Not solely jobs, although I do take the point about jobs and sort of people being highly educated and working well below their capacity. So meaningful jobs, not just a million jobs, but good quality jobs. But I think sort of before the job phase, there's something we have to talk about education, and I'm not hearing too much about that. I'm not hearing too much about sort of college and university, sort of post-secondary education.
Now, you work in that world, so you are, of course, interested in that.
I do. It's crucial. And I don't sort of want to reduce everything to sort of a corporate mentality or model, because there's value to education apart from getting a job. And I wish that we could sort of put priority on sort of incubating or even isolating kids somewhat for 4 years in university to do some soul-building work and not just work that will sort of get them a paycheck.
Valerie, is this election about more than jobs in the economy in your view?
I would hope so, but that seems to be, certainly it's the only discussion that Mr. Hudak wants to go into, and his solutions require a leap of faith. And I don't think faith belongs in politics. The NDP and the Liberals have a grab bag. I haven't been able to focus. I've tried really hard to focus on what they're proposing, and it seems to be a grab bag of things, and I sometimes get very disappointed because, take for instance healthcare, Band-Aid solutions, few extra nurses here or something like that. If anybody's read Jeffrey Simpson's book, you realize we need to rethink this entire budget-eating program, and not to make it worse, as Mr. Simpson says, but to improve it. And Band-Aids here and there aren't going to make the difference.
Do you think it's possible, genuine question here, do you think it's possible in a 140-character Twitterverse, in a world where most of the coverage on television is 30-second voiceovers read by anchors, maybe the odd minute-and-a-half story? I mean, you see what I'm getting at here. Yes. You're talking about comprehensive health care reform. 90% of the media that you will encounter during the course of this campaign is incapable of covering that, even if it were put forward. So where does that leave us?
It leaves us in a bad place. I know Kim Campbell said the elections are not a time for policy discussions, but it certainly doesn't impress me. And I search really diligently to try to figure out what the different parties are saying. I really want to know. And I do know what Mr. Hudak is saying. That's quite clear.
You haven't taken that leap of faith, but Paul has. Mm-hmm. Do you think this election is just about jobs and the economy and that's it?
No, I think it should be about everything. And I think education, healthcare, and everything actually does go hand in hand with the economy. We're paying $11 billion a year right now just for interest on the debt. And you think what $11 billion could do just for healthcare and education and everything else in this country. It's mind-boggling. And if they get reelected, we're looking at a credit downgrade, which is going to add more interest onto the debt, which is going to take more money out that you could be spending on healthcare and education.
I got to tell you, I'm not sure 1 in 10,000 Ontarians would know that there's $11 billion as a line item in the budget on interest on the debt.
The third highest expenditure.
How do you know that? You're right, but how do you know it?
I read up on this stuff.
I'm impressed. Okay, good for you. That's great. But you said you would like to hear about other issues in the campaign. You haven't so far. Is that a problem for you?
I think the problem is when you see all the three leaders on TV, you're only getting that 20 or 30 second soundbite. But if you actually look into it a little further, you get, Tim Hudak's talking about eliminating drive clean. Andrea Horwath said she was in favor of lowering small business taxes, that kind of thing. It doesn't really get out to the media that much. They're all looking for that big gotcha moment, or they got him on this or they got him on all that. And I think it just kind of distracts from the whole conversation.
Now, are you voting Conservative because you really love the Conservatives, or is it more because you can't stand the Liberals?
Well, at this point in time, I really can't stand the Liberals. I will say one thing. She mentioned, she called her Kathleen Wynne's predecessor. Well, Kathleen Wynne's been an MPP and a cabinet minister since 2003. So it's not a predecessor. She's been part of that group of people. And I think if you talk about transparency, she's probably the worst one out of the three leaders for kind of, I don't know a nice way to put it. She more or less blurs the real facts about an issue. Case in point, when she went to Walkerton and complained about the Mike Harris cuts that she blames for the deaths in Walkerton, which was a huge tragedy. But she stood up in front of the cameras and said, well, we're committing $30 million for 10 years. What she didn't tell you was it was $4 million a year for 10 years before. So she actually cut their budget by 25% and gets that soundbite in, like she's actually doing something good, but she's actually taken 25% of that money out for the clean water station in Walkerton. And I mean, that's good politics, but I think it's crappy leadership.
Okay. Rashi, how about, are there enough options on the table for you in this election? And by that I mean, 90% of the coverage you're going to run into is all Liberals, Conservatives, New Democrats. Would you like to hear more?
Absolutely.
From what?
Well, again, as I mentioned, the real issue for me is immigrant settlement.
Issues.
Right?
What parties do you want to know more about?
Well, I mean, I was really glad that you had the Green Party on. That was something, I think they've grown tremendously as a party from when I last lived in Ontario. So in that sense, I wouldn't say that I would like to hear from more parties. I would just like to hear maybe more in-depth coverage from the parties that are here at hand.
Okay. Ian, do you want to hear more options out there?
I do, and it's not so much about parties. I just want to hear other ideas, right? I want to hear see other ways of seeing the world through lenses that haven't been sort of framed by really kind of rigid ideologies. And that just means hearing more voices, right? They could be immigrant voices, they could be whatever. We just need to hear other voices.
How do we do that?
That's tricky, right? That is difficult, easy to say. I think we have some understanding of just the names of parties and all of that. But I think it really starts sort of on community engagement, so not from the top, not with sort of big media productions, but really starts on a local level, like you go to, this would be great in Europe, you go to your town square or something, right? You go to your central meeting place. But the sense of community has been blown apart. So our cities are too big, our ridings are sort of fractured. So we don't get a sense of locally who's engaged politically, even on my street or in my little subdivision there. It's hard to know. It's hard to know.
There are other options, of course, out there. The parties with seats in the legislature get most of the ice time on television and in the newspapers and so on. But of course, the Libertarians are out there in the Family Coalition and, on and on it goes. Freedom Party. I think communists and Marxist-Leninists run candidates still.
Rhinoceros, maybe?
Well, I don't think the rhinos do anymore, but I think there's a new one getting set up called None of the Above, which has been being set up as well. Do you want to hear more about these other options?
I would really like to have proportional representation. I think the time has come to get rid of this first-past-the-post system. It doesn't give people a sense of participating because I probably have voted for more losing governments in my life than winning governments. I really think it would be wonderful if say the Green Party, because I was listening to your program and because I'm very concerned about climate change and the environment, and other policies that they are supporting. For instance, fascinating to see that they would amalgamate the two school systems. But if we had proportional representation, we might have those ideas brought into Parliament, and I think it'd be wonderful.
We're not going to have proportional representation.
I know that, but I think we should keep talking about it, and maybe someday somebody will do it.
It's possible someday. It's not going to happen for this election, that's for sure.
No, not this one, I know that. But.
I guess one of the troubles is a lot of the parties that pitch it are the parties that are the ones that never win. So if they can't win, they can't implement it, right?
That's the whole issue about changing big things like healthcare, education. These are huge ideas, and no one seems able to talk about them. We could do it under Pearson. We could do it under Trudeau. We could do it under the 40 years of Conservatives. We can't do it now. It's strange, isn't it?
The 40 years of Conservatives in Ontario.
Rule in Ontario, yes.
Gotcha. Paul, how about you on this issue of whether or not there's enough choice out there for you?
I think any views are worth listening to, regardless of where they're coming from. More input is always better for the system.
How would we do it?
Well, it's like you said. I mean, you gave the Greens some time on this show, which I think is great. I agree with some of their platform. Some of their economic stuff makes sense to me, which it kind of mirrors some of the PC stuff, and some of their stuff is more towards NDP or more towards Liberal.
Ian, you're the poet here, so I'm going to go. This is a famous quote that I'm trying to remember now. I think it might have been in the middle 1980s when Mario Cuomo, the former governor of New York, said this, when he said, "We campaign in poetry, but we govern in prose." And it's a lovely quote that really does sum up how kind of lofty and appealing to the better angels sometimes in all of us that campaigns you can sometimes see, but that governing is just sort of getting your feet in the muck and making the hard decisions and all of that. Have you heard much poetry in this campaign?
I've heard bad poetry, I think.
Bad poetry. Well, look you're a published poet, so you're in a position to make that judgment.
Not great poetry. And even sort of the pros of governance, I don't think even that's sort of the right analogy. I think the ideal sort of situation, or the ideal literary form for sort of electoral politics would be something like drama, right? Where you've got an engaged citizen and you've got a politician really sort of engaged in a dialectic back and forth, a dialogue. Right? Neither poetry nor prose. Although the fiction has been good, the poetry has been bad.
The fiction is good. How about it,
to the
Rob?
election.
Yeah. How about it? Do you hear much poetry in this election campaign so far?
No, I like the drama analogy better. We certainly got lots of choruses, Greek style or whatever. But I think there is no poetry. I look from time to time on the internet to see what they're doing, and I find that there's a lot of slogans, a lot of reductions, as you say, 30-second sound bites, and no poetry, no, sadly.
Paul, you hearing any poetry?
No poetry. I've seen a lot of comedy so far, the best way to put it.
Tragic comedy or just comedy?
Some of it's tragic.
What was the one thing in this campaign you saw that you just thought, oh, that's hysterical, I can't believe that happened?
I find it kind of funny when you see a candidate will actually kind of come out and contradict their leader's platform or their own party's platform.
Hasn't happened too often.
It doesn't happen, but when it does happen, I kind of shake my head and think,
somebody
didn't get their talking points for that day or something. I don't know what's going on.
Gotcha. Rashi, how about you?
Well, nothing has been music to my ears. Let's put it that way. Simply because I think the issues that I feel strongly about haven't been discussed. And again, it's disappointing. There's a lot of mudslinging. But I'm also disappointed in the press for not going into each candidate's platform and kind of being aggressive about finding things there and bringing them to the discussion table.
Okay, with a few minutes to go here, I actually want to go back to the beginning. And by that, I mean your respective beginnings. I want to find out, if you remember, what your first encounter with politics was in your life. Your first political memory. Paul, do you remember what it was?
I think it would probably be Pierre Trudeau being on TV and my father saying, "What a jerk."
Now, what year would that have been?
That would have been, I can't remember, that would have been the 70s. I'm kind of dating myself.
In the 1970s, so he's Prime Minister at the time.
He's Prime Minister at the time, yeah.
Okay. Ian, how about you?
I think there was a report that I did in grade 6 about the fall of communism. And I got to pull out a $10 word, I remember that, for the word value, not for the political value. And shortly after, I remember Kim Campbell coming to power and sort of feeling sympathy for her as sort of the fall, much like I sort of feel this for Kathleen Wynne, the fall guy for a party. And I was young, I was maybe 11 or 12 years old or something. And I remember that moment, to see her as a human being taking the fall for another party.
This was 1993, when the Conservatives went down to 2 seats.
Right.
And she ended up wearing it.
Right, for 4 months or something like that, right? It was a very short reign.
She was PM for a short time.
Yeah.
That's right. Rashi, how about you? Do you remember your first political memory?
Well, it wasn't in Canada.
It wasn't in Canada.
So I don't know if that counts, but I spent my formative years in Nigeria. So I knew what the word coup meant by the time I was 3 years old.
C-O-U-P, you mean?
Yes, yes. So very much a different kind of politics. And it doesn't mean that it's any less exciting here in Canada, because it is. But of course, not quite as dramatic.
I find that too sometimes when we cover things like Ukraine and Russia, China, whatever, and then I have to pivot to talk about something in Ontario, and I sometimes think, boy, our problems are really pretty simple compared to some people's in the world. How about you? First memory of politics?
I think if I go back far enough, it's my father who expressed his disappointment with the Premier of the day, George Drew. My father was a very thoughtful man. He wasn't a conservative.
This is the 1940s we're talking now.
Yes, I must have been very young. And then I remember later reminding him of that, and he said, well, you know, not all of the conservative premiers were bad. Leslie Frost was an admirable premier. So that
That's
was
great.
the kind of background I had with my father, because he was very interested in politics.
But not so interested in conservatives.
He was not a conservative.
And you inherited that from him?
No, I thought it out myself. I did vote conservative once. I voted for our tiny perfect mayor.
David Crombie?
Yes, and was proud to do so.
You mean when he ran for Parliament
That's
federally?
right, yes.
Okay, so you have voted conservative.
I forgot about that one.
Okay, good enough. Well, it's good of all four of you to come in tonight and share your views with us. And of course, are you going to vote on Election Day?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I got 4 yeses here. Oh, if only you were representative of the whole province, wouldn't that be something? Okay, thanks to Paul Burling and Rashid Kilnani, Valerie Schatzker, and Ian Williams. Great to have you on the program tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.